So I now will hand over to our chair for the session, Simone Hume, that leads the non-profit organisations part of the sector at AWS. So over to you, Simone, and if I can ask our panellists as well to unmute themselves and come off camera for the panel session.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Georgina. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Brilliant. Hi, Matthew.
Hello.
All right, well, good morning and welcome to the Tech UK Building the Smarter State Conference. My name is Simone Hume, and as you've already heard, I lead the UK not-for-profit business for AWS Public Sector here in the UK. Just as our panel members come on, I can see Matthew, and hopefully in a moment I will be able to see Katie and Mark as well.
Yep. Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Katie. Lovely. Great stuff. Okay, so before I introduce the panel formally, a little bit of housekeeping for everybody that's tuned in to join us this morning. We will stop around 11:15 for any questions, so please do put them online. And Georgina, I think, is going to help us collate those questions, and we'll try and leave about 5 minutes at the end to get through as many of those as we can with the panel. So I'm really delighted to be here today with you all, and I'd like to give a very warm welcome to our panel, and I'd like to introduce you all right now. So starting with you, Katie Bourne, OBE, Police and Crime Commissioner for Sussex and the Chair of the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners. Hopefully I've got all of that correct. Welcome. Matthew Kane, Head of Digital and Data at Hackney Council, and Mark Gannon, Director of Business Change and Information Solutions at Sheffield City Council. So a very warm welcome to you today. And during this morning's panel, we're going to explore how public services across the UK are working together to solve some of the common challenges and improve outcomes for citizens and local economies. So now I'd like to address the panel and ask each of you, as public service leaders, how are you overcoming the obstacles to working digitally, not only within your own organisations to engender change and improve outcomes, but with partners across your localities to create smarter places where citizens can thrive and really feel safe? What does a smarter state look like for yourselves? And along with any examples of innovations you'd like to share with the audience today. I think let's start with Matthew, then Katie, and then we'll follow on with Mark.
Sure, okay. So I think one of the things that I've been learning over the last couple of years from our work in Hackney is that innovation that really changes people's lives is often about, it's rarely about moonshots. It's often about taking components that already exist and joining them together in new ways to create value for citizens. And I think too often we can get overexcited about the potential of a new technology or a new system or a way of doing something profoundly different. One of the things we've been able to do during coronavirus to support our residents is to build on some of the really long-term investments that Hackney has made that predate me by significantly. So, for example, we were able to match data across council records to understand the numbers of people who might be affected in terms of health, in terms of economically educational outcomes, but simply by joining people against the unique property reference number. And because we have that in all line of business applications, we can form that single view of a resident. That's deeply unexciting if you're the FD, if you're the director of adult services and wonder why that has to be imposed on your business application until you really need it. So when we're talking about small pieces loosely joined, that's also enabled us to continue adapting our approach through COVID, whether that was initially about feeding residents who are hungry or now about making welfare calls or track and trace. So being able to take, for example, our open directory of services and use that API so that when a vulnerable resident is phoning us and asking where can I go for help with food or with financial advice, we can provide up to the day information on which community organisations have capacity, which have halal food, for example, to support a resident, where we can join that together with a little strengths-based tool we've used to support an empathic conversation with a vulnerable resident, connecting via our open APIs to help build up that whole view of a resident. So I think small pieces loosely joined leave us incredibly well equipped to working beyond our organisational boundaries and beyond our public service boundaries to make sure we're creating new value for residents.
Excellent, thank you. And Katie, moving to yourself.
There's so much in this area to cover, really. It's difficult in a couple of minutes just to pin it down to give you a couple of examples, I suppose. So from a policing point of view, for me, I see policing, you know, we have this fantastic model of policing in this country where we police by consent. So we do it with the support of the public, because let's face it, if 70 million people rose up and decided they didn't want a police force, it'd be pretty difficult for the police to cope with that. So the public understanding, the public confidence, and that public engagement piece is really vital to policing. And I've often talked about, you know, we're very used to the physical beat, but what about the digital beat now that policing has to walk? So what does that look like? Well, that's about, you know, how do the public make contact with the police in the first instance when they want to, you know, put the call in or give that piece of vital intelligence through. And there's a big program that's been running with Inside Policing in the Home Office, the digital policing program, that looks at how can the public more easily contact the police online. And there's also other pieces of work happening now about actually how can the public contact the police in the space that they're used to using. So rather than just using your telephone or the online on the computer, if you're used to using some of the social media platforms, for example, like WhatsApp and those chat platforms, can you contact the police within those, and can they contact you very quickly within it and give you the information that you require? There's some interesting pilots that have been running on that. And then there's the piece about the police then have to gather all that intelligence. So how do they do that digitally in this world as well? So, you know, how do they build that digital case files at the same time? And then how do they transfer that into the you know, Crown Prosecution Service and onto the the court service, so that the whole thing is seamless from literally from contact through to court. And then the other side of policing is very much around the enforcement piece and locking up the bad guys effectively. And so there's a piece of work that I've been leading on across the Southeast, looking at how we can get police officers in the first instance to give evidence into court digitally, to make it much more efficient for them, because we know on average a police officer will spend about 5 hours waiting to give evidence in court, and he or she may only be required for 20 minutes, but they're sitting around for a long period of time, and many of those cases then get disposed of or postponed for various reasons. So how can we make that process more efficient? And of course, COVID has really brought that into focus. So across 5 forces in the Southeast, we have a programme running now across Norfolk, Suffolk, Sussex, Kent and Surrey police, where officers can give that evidence straight into court. But also we've branched it out as well. So we've been able to, working with a business provider, we've been able to bespoke a piece of software that enables the Crown Prosecution Service to give their evidence from remote locations as well, for defence solicitors to be beamed in too, and for interpreters, as well as for the offender who's in that custody suite and maybe going to court for, you know, their first hearing. So there's a huge amount of work going on at the moment. And then what does that mean to the public, to you and I? You know, if we understand about how we want to contact the police digitally and use technology and so on, but actually how do the police, walking that digital beat, go out and keep our communities safe using technology? So one example is we've been running a program called Reboot in Sussex, working with young people, so under the age of 18, who are just on the cusp of criminality. So they're coming to the notice of the police for the wrong reasons. How do we, particularly through COVID, continue that work with them? So the Reboot program is a way of referring them into work with lots of agencies and actually looking at some of the more positive behaviours of the young person. So rather than focus on don't do the naughty stuff, actually working with that young person on a one-to-one mentoring program, saying what are you good at, whether it's boxing or dance or whatever it may be, and getting them into those programs. And what COVID has done for us is actually really brought this home. You know, how do we continue that using technology and actually, you know, don't lose these young people. And in the last year and a half, we've had nearly 1,000 young people go through this program in our county alone, which was far more than we ever anticipated. And we've managed to keep it going as well using technology, getting them involved online. And of course, they're more tech savvy than anybody. So they're more used to this. So really working with partners in a very innovative way. And they're just kind of a couple of examples of where kind of policing is going on this.
That's great. Thank you, Katie. And I actually managed to watch the reboot video. So there's a video available that we'll make available to the audience through Tech UK. I would really urge everybody to watch that video. It was really compelling to see how a young person's life was really changing through that program. So a great example. Thank you. And over to yourself, Mark.
Hi. Yeah, there's quite a lot in this space to talk about, so I'm going to try and summarize it as well as I can. I mean, we've been on a bit of a journey over the past couple of years anyway, in terms of our transformation as an organization and as a city. So we had a SCC 2020 program, and COVID has just kind of accelerated that, to be honest. And I know a lot of public sector organizations are, I mean, taking advantage, I suppose, of what COVID has presented to us. At the start of March, when lockdown happened, we were able to probably allow 500 of our employees to work remotely. Now that was a bit of a problem for me, as you know, in charge of our IT infrastructure. But over the period, we've deployed 5,000 laptops, Windows 10 laptops. We've upped from 500 to 8,000. Spaces for people to work remotely. We've deployed 60 line of business applications on our remote Azure infrastructure. Sorry, AWS. And that has absolutely revolutionized our ability to provide services during COVID. But actually what it's also done is it's short-circuited probably several years of conversations with services about why it's really important that they adopt, you know, flexible ways of working in digital. It's short-circuited that, which is a good thing. The bad thing is it's meant that we've jumped over all the cultural development stuff that you would normally do in a program like that. So I think we're going to have to sort of go back and do some of that. I think we've spent a lot of time fixing the plumbing, as Paul Maltby describes it. So we moved from a big behemoth outsourced IT legacy contract, and we're in the process of disaggregating that. That itself brings lots of opportunities to work with partners across the city in terms of procurement opportunities to, you know, align some of our strategic objectives as a set of anchor institutions across the city. But also, I think one of the things that public sector organizations have at their fingertips and need to use more is the ability to influence the shape of markets through the way they procure. So, you know, very small example is we've been working to make sure that all of our supply chain pay the minimum wage, for example. So, you know, through procuring technology, we can influence the shape of that. And the other thing is we're trying to break down some of the bigger contracts and allow some of us, the smaller vendors, some locally and not locally, to be able to bid for some of our contracts and our projects. One of the big areas that I think COVID has really shone a light on is digital skills. You know, big public sector organizations are made up of a cross population of people from the city. Some of them are, you know, very advanced in how they can use the technology and understand what a digital service looks like, and some aren't. So I think it's really shone a light on it. We kind of pre-COVID actually worked with Sheffield Hallam University to do a census of all of our staff to assess the levels of digital skills. We're in the process of implementing a series of learning and development interventions to enable them to not only adopt and exploit the technology, but understand what digital services mean. I think we're moving much more away from this idea that digital services are things on a website, and actually digital services are services now. And I think we're One of the things that I'm working hard on is digital leadership in my organization. And I don't know about anyone else, but I'm sure everyone at some point has sat in an audience where someone really senior has stood up in front of an organization and said, oh, I don't really know about IT, as if that's some kind of badge of honor. And when I see that, I call that out at the minute, because I think it's unacceptable for leaders now to be unaware of the benefits of digital, because actually, I think COVID has shown that digital is going to be one of the significant ways that we're going to be able to navigate this crisis. Whether it's the use of data, and I think the previous two speakers have talked about data, and I think data and intelligence for me is where it's at. It's not about paper, it's not about records. It's about how you move data around the system in as friction-free way as possible. And fundamentally, I think for me, this is around purpose. I think we often get involved in conversations about cool tech stuff or digital, and actually this is ultimately about what are we trying to achieve here? What's the purpose? And I think at a city level, one of the things that I'm trying to work with colleagues on is understanding what our shared strategy is for the city. So working with the University of Sheffield, Sheffield Hallam, South Yorkshire Police, the health economy in Sheffield, to try and work up what's important to us as a city, and how do we align our resources and our strategies? Because frankly, we know that it's going to be incredibly tough financially going forward. We're never going to go back to what it was like anyway, but certainly, the resourcing challenges are going to be of such a significant level that cities and local public sector infrastructures are going to have to work together. There's no choice in that. So alignment of purpose and strategy and resources. I've been working with my South Yorkshire local authority colleagues, again, around identifying some of the procurement opportunities. And actually what's interesting, we are aligning our strategies around Microsoft technologies, for example. So how can we share collateral, share knowledge, share learning to help each of us develop? And we've adopted a kind of communities of practice and a centre of excellence approach, where each authority is responsible for owning a certain aspect of that kind of implementation life cycle, and then we work with each other to make sure that we kind of get to the right place on that. Sorry, I've got much more on here, but I know that there's not much time.
Enough lies. Well, before I move on to my next question, I was actually interested in what you were saying about the digital skills and creating that model with Sheffield University. So I guess the follow-on question for me around that is around, how did you, have you created a new delivery model, making the digital skills and training a core part of everybody's development? Or how have you governed and implemented that new way of working? Just very quickly, it'd be really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, just very, very briefly, interestingly, the Sheffield Hallam, they actually deployed students across Sheffield to sit down with people, particularly those say in parks and countryside who don't use IT every day, or street sweepers, the classic people, the manual workers. My personal view is that I think local authorities, public services have a moral duty to enable their staff to make the most of the digital world that they live in, not just within the organization, but also within the cities they live in, because we're all going to have multiple careers. And actually those students, as part of their study, were able to gain points from helping us with the digital skills. We've done it in 3 chunks. One is around digital leadership. So this is about those kind of very senior leaders, chief exec, executive management team directors, and helping them to understand the power that digital can bring, and actually understanding how to recognize when services aren't working very well and could benefit from that kind of end-to-end digital life cycle. There's then the leveling up, I guess we're calling it, which is basically identifying where we expect people to be at a basic level, not focusing on those people who are already above it, but focusing on those people who maybe need to be brought up to that level, and that's where we're putting most of the intervention activity. And then as we are deploying all of our new technology, Office 365, all of that stuff, we're picking out specific development and learning interventions and making those available. So there's kind of three-pronged attack, really.
Great, thank you for sharing that. Really, thank you. So thank you, everybody. Really great examples, and really open of you guys to share your experiences with us. There's some fantastic work really happening across the communities through sharing, collaborating, and joining up that data. And you've all touched on various elements of that. We talk about challenges. What I'd really like to understand from each of you and have a little bit of a discussion around is really highlighting those bigger challenges that you experience, not only internally, but externally, working with those external partnerships, as you've mentioned. You know, how have you really overcome them? Any examples of how you've really done that collaboration? What's worked well, what hasn't worked well? Any sort of really key lessons learned for our audience to really think about. So we can think about things like the open data side of things. We can think about the governance that you have to put in place. How do you identify the right stakeholders? And then how do you set yourselves up for success? So just open to the panel for that discussion, please. Matthew and Katie, maybe you want to kick off that discussion,
Well,
and then Mark, you can join in.
Yeah, so why don't we start with Mark's theme around digital skills. So one of the things that was really important for us in Hackney was that there was a belief that because we were close to the city, we could never employ and retain digital talent. So there were a few different steps we needed to go on to correct that. The first was to make our workplace a place where digital SMEs wanted to work, where local digital talent wanted to come and sit. Yes, it was about beanbags and bunting, but it was also about being able to deploy code on day one of a project, because you'd be set up on the Git repo, you'd be up on Slack, you'd be sharing docs and so on and so forth. So it's about making our workplace so good that people prefer to be there. Obviously, it's slightly sad now that benefit is no longer what it quite once was. It was then about a radical investment in apprenticeships as well. So amongst our team of about 150, I think we've now got 35 apprentices, which is fantastic in terms of providing opportunities for local people working in the council, but also ensuring a career path for them. So working closely with AWS in terms of making sure they've got mentors that they can look up to. We now have devs joining the council because they also like our tech stack. They like our CI/CD pipeline. They like the fact that we're doing containerization. So that's a step away from, I think, the norm in the sector. So fixing the culture by making sure it's a place so good that people preferred to work there. In terms of the governance, I mean, fundamentally, we're talking about how do we respond to people's raised expectations. And again, COVID's been an opportunity in the sense that we weren't able to sit around and wonder about whether we could do this via paper or via spreadsheet. The size of the challenge and the remoteness of the way we had to work meant that the answer was always going to be technology. The question was only how fast could we get there? And we've been introducing agile practices, week notes, show and tells, all of that good stuff. But actually the game changer comes when you can go to Cabinet and you can show them that the feature that you talked about last week is already deployed, and you can show the impact that that's had on citizens in the last 3 days. And that's when, some fairly dull conversations about, do we prefer this method or the other method for getting the job done, actually kind of step into the background, and the point of it becomes self-evident. So, that's given us, I think, a huge opportunity to step up and meet the expectations that colleagues have from the way that they use technology in their personal lives, and bring that into their work lives to bridge that gap, and then make sure that we're doing that in a way which where we're able to work with different community groups better, with our colleagues in the clinical commissioning group, or within the Homerton Hospital, or, and more besides, because by taking small pieces and making sure we can join them loosely, we're not having to impose a sort of one-size-fits-all approach on the whole of the borough.
And you mentioned open government solutions earlier. Could you just give us a little bit of insight into why you went down that road, what your sort of thought processes were, and again, a little bit maybe around the governance that you've implemented yourselves in this change?
Of course. So we have a directly elected mayor in Hackney, Mayor Glanville, and Phil Glanville's on public record as a digital lead in London government, as saying the taxpayer shouldn't have to pay twice for innovation. So it was essential to our approach that everything be open source, and that seemed unarguable to us. So we tend to buy as small as we can when we're partnering with an agency. We make all of our information, we work in the open by default. Our pipeline is on Local Gov Digital Pipeline, so all suppliers can see our upcoming projects. Our week notes are all on our corporate blog, and so on and so forth. So that should make us really easy to work with. By making all of our code open, we're ensuring that the taxpayer doesn't have to pay twice for innovation. But we've also, I think lots of the folks on this call might have used products in the last 12 weeks like gov.uk Notify. In order to send text messages to residents or to staff, or emails or letters. So we've all benefited from being able to reuse components built elsewhere. It's fantastic that we're able to do that within the public sector in the UK, but how much more exciting would it be if actually that's not limited to the sort of private closed platform that GDS is offering through the Cabinet Office at the moment, but actually an open platform. So we were really keen to be part of AWS's Open Government Solutions, because it's an opportunity for us to learn and share with colleagues in Canada, the US, Australia, and so on and so forth. Actually, if a notifications system works well in one territory, there's nothing stopping it working well in another. So we've shared all our user research openly, so that people can find out where the lived experiences of people in Hackney are distinct from those in the southeast in Sheffield, and where actually they're the same. And so we can build on that. And so we've benefited so much from what other people have shared, that we think being able to work in the open across national boundaries is the key next step to being able to drive genuine transformation across the public sector.
And that's really great. Thank you for sharing that. And we can share more information around that program later for anybody else that's interested. And I'm sure everyone on the panel would be open to follow-up communications as well. So I'm sure we can facilitate some of that afterwards too. And Katie, I'm really interested again, particularly around Reboot, but obviously you give lots of examples earlier as well around the challenges, and really interested just to pick up on that point around how did you understand the key stakeholders to engage with, particularly when you were working with other organisations and that governance, and any lessons learned from that you want to share with everybody today?
Thanks, Simone. I was just reflecting actually on the speakers. So before I got into the role that I'm in and became a politician, as it were, in the public sector, I ran my own business for many years and was quite successful in that and sold it and what have you. And I suppose for me, the one thing I love about the public sector is it's always very positive about the achievements. If I can just throw a bit of cold water on and a bit of realism, actually, my frustration, I think, is still that I do not see the sharing that we should be having. And technology should be an enabler for everything, but it's always about relationships. And that's where, for me, the barriers always come. We talked, I think it was Matthew was talking about the governance piece, and that's absolutely critical. I see, unless you've got that governance and people have an accountability line, they will always go off and do their own thing. And so, I'm very interested in the mayoral model, because you do see that one person who has that governance across the piece and can drive change. And certainly using my role, for example, across criminal justice, it's really, really difficult, the whole experience. And I chair our local criminal justice board, and we have all our partners sit around it. But at the end of the day, they all speak to their own masters. So whilst you might come together to try and achieve something, it's very, very difficult to actually drive that leadership through. Technology should enable it, but we've all got different systems. We don't share the data. We all have different standards. And some of, certainly in criminal justice, and I don't know what it's like in the council world, but there are some partners in criminal justice who don't give you up-to-date information. So you're even waiting a year's quarter. You might be waiting 6 months for information to come out. Well, by the time you get that, let's face it, where you're talking about criminality, things move pretty fast in this area. So for me, it's really frustrating. And Mark used the phrase, he said, COVID has made us jump over cultural issues. I loved that phrase, so I jotted it down. This leapfrogging over all the things that mattered to us before COVID happened. So some of the ethical issues that we have around sharing the data, and those cultural issues. So, let me give you an example. You've got a defendant who's in custody, an offender taken into custody, who isn't guilty until obviously they've gone to court and been proven guilty. So could be, you're Katie Bourne, she's in a custody suite. And we suddenly say, well, we've got COVID, we've got the technology, everyone's going to beam in now to the court. We're seeing, have we got any evidence that that offender isn't going to be negatively impacted by the fact that they're having to give their evidence in the first instance online like this? Mm-hmm. Judges have always said how much they like to see the whites of the eyes, and they like the person in the physical court. Do we have enough evidence to show that this isn't going to negatively impact that individual? What does this mean for our justice going forward? So there's some big, big cultural issues as well that I think COVID's thrown up. And in the rush to use technology, we must be very careful that we don't overlook some of those other issues as well. So there we are, some big thoughts there. And
so really interesting, and I'm interested to hear what Mark and Matthew's thoughts are around that particular area as well. So around that governance piece and the relationship piece, based on what Casey has said.
I mean, I'm CSIRO for my organization, so I'm obviously really interested in, data and information governance. I think often though the people start there, and that's the wrong place to start, and you just get bogged down in conversations about why things are hard and why things can't happen. And I think my advice to the public sector is to start in a different place, which again, and I think both Katie and Matt's points are around this. It's how do you get that shared vision across a place? What does that look like? I think part of the reason why it's quite difficult to work collaboratively across the public sector is because it's just quite difficult. I mean, there's no magic bullet. It's hard stuff. System leadership is difficult stuff, and actually leading within an organization and leading across the system are quite different skill sets actually. So, and I think I don't think the public sector invests enough time in developing leaders who can navigate across a system or a place. I think what we've been trying to do in Sheffield is start those conversations again around that shared purpose and thinking about kind of what those shared outcomes are. I think where it often falls down is because you have people who are having really good conversations at a particular level. Those conversations then don't reflect back into organizational strategies, which drive the resourcing decisions, which drive what you're measured on as a leader. And actually it just falls apart at that point. So actually, how do we actually get those anchor institutions talking at a senior strategic level and reflecting those conversations into their organizational strategies, which then will drive the resourcing? And if you deal with that kind of allows a different kind of conversation. I think Katie's point was around trust and personal relationships. It's all about that. I mean, it's not really about tech at all, this stuff. It's about trust. It's about human interactions, and it's about building that. And you build that, and I think it was Matthew's earlier point around the simple stuff. If you try and boil the ocean, people just can't visualize how it's possible, and they just withdraw from the conversation. So one of the things we've done in Sheffield is we've had this, we started talking about this 5 in 5. What are the 5 things that we can do in 5 years? And let's just focus on those 5 things, not 50 things in 2 years, because then people just don't believe it's possible and aren't prepared to put time and effort and resources into doing it. So one of ours is around how do we make Sheffield the most connected city, in the country. So we've been doing a lot of work on that around our digital connectivity strategy and our barrier busting gold-plated, according to BT, approach to enabling fibre providers and broadband providers to come in and actually make Sheffield a connected place. Shared care record. That's another area where we think, sharing data around health and social care is going to be fundamental. Now, again, you've still got to ask the purpose question. It's, it's not just good to have a care record for a care record's sake. That's not helpful. What problems are we going to solve? So those 5 things in 5 years, that just kind of focuses the mind. And I think that then allows those organizations to kind of reflect that back into their strategies. But there's no easy answer. It's lots of hard work, and it's lots of conversations, and it's relationships with people and building trust over a period of time, and a bit of tech.
So I think that's right. I mean, from just to try and link those two things. So firstly, to be sort of deliberately provocative, I take a slightly different stance from Mark. I think the benefits of trying to align particularly cross-organizational strategies are not as great as the frictions involved in doing so, and particularly the time it takes. So I think that, but it's not an either or, right? But I think there's real power in the sort of bottom-up innovations, but that's not to downplay the systemic barriers that exist to those bottom-up innovations. So a practical example, we had some benefits and housing needs officers who designed a shared plan concept. So for someone at risk of homelessness, the Homelessness Reduction Act says you will be given a plan. That plan has some statutory guidance, and therefore the plan is poorly written often, and the plan is almost never referenced for a second time. The concept of a shared plan enables us to tease out for a resident the most important things that they need to do, the things that we're going to do with them, and provide a sense of that shared accountability. It's a really, really simple tool, and because it's been co-designed with people at risk of homelessness and the staff involved, it's working incredibly well. We couldn't impose that on a different authority and expect it to work equally well, because that sort of co-creation and collaboration hasn't taken place. And we've done that without any of the big blockers around coordinating with different public bodies, because actually the tool is so good, people prefer to use it, and we can get the other stuff out of the way. But I know that there'll be colleagues listening to us today who have had equally good ideas, who then come across a particular information governance officer who has said no, and they've never been able to unblock that because the CIRO is in the wrong place within the organisation. I think in a Hackney context, we found GDPR to be an incredibly good law for an occasion like COVID. Some of those arguments have just gone away because of the self-evident need to keep people safe. But I recognise that as soon as you make something someone's responsibility, you're also creating potentially a little fiefdom for that person to exercise extraordinary power and blocker within your organisation.
I agree with you. I agree with you, Matthew. It's a bit like it's a kind of bottom up and top down, and then hoping that they meet in the middle. Actually, I think is what we're probably saying. And I think that the point you mentioned, which we haven't really got onto yet, which I think is fundamental, is the difference that COVID has brought in terms of how communities are engaging in the development and engagement with services. Certainly in our area, communities have taken much more responsibility for more proactively linking together either individual people or community organizations, and actually putting in place really useful things like Voluntary Action Sheffield put together a crowdsourced map that was accessible, open source, of all of the support services during the COVID crisis during the early days. And as the authority, we thought, that's great, we'll add to that. We don't need to create it again, it's already there. So how do we support that? I think there's something about the humility of public services as well, and not feeling like you know everything and that you're in charge of everything, and actually creating that space for other people to come together and show what's possible.
It's really interesting times that, the Facebook kind of social pages of today are the town halls of yesteryear. And what from a policing aspect they're finding is there's a huge amount of intelligence actually that's being shared on these areas, because that's where people are congregating at the moment. So they need to be in those areas, but some of the technologies prevented them from getting there, which has been equally frustrating. So that's the sort of digital beat. But if I look at, where you've got a domestic abuse situation, so we saw going into lockdown, we knew that domestic abuse would increase because people are locked up together. It's bound to happen. But those victims behind closed doors couldn't get out and report because they've constantly got the perpetrator living with them and over their shoulder. And the police, in the first instance, will always want a face-to-face meeting with that individual if they do, if they're able to report. And how do the police do that, especially when you've got COVID as well? but well, they use technology, so they've been really creative, certainly in my neck of the woods in Sussex, by giving the opportunity for a victim, when they report in, they will then send them a link. The victim can open up the link and have that one-to-one, like we're having now, with the police officer, who can ask the necessary questions. It's all safeguarded. They can put necessary package around the victim. And then as soon as he or she closes down the link, it literally disappears. There is no breadcrumb trail for even the most tech-savvy offender or perpetrator to try and follow. So some really creative stuff happening, some of it COVID-driven. I think it was always out there, but we've been able to push the boundaries a bit quicker. Not fast enough for me, but
yeah, it's really the examples from all of you are just amazing, and I think I do agree that our current situation has enforced some of those changes to happen. However, the important bit is really the collaboration, the governance, the individuals, the relationships. The tech is there, regardless of what way you choose to go. It is about getting these other things in place. And I think that's really come through in all of your pieces this morning. So thank you for being so very, very open. We're at 11 minutes past. So I know there's been some questions that have come through. I still have a lot of stuff I'd love to sit and chat to you guys about, but I can't. So I'll just move to the chat. Georgina, do you want me just to ask the questions myself, or have you got any prioritization around them?
Yeah, no, happy to share that, Simone, thank you. Lots around data sharing, the challenges around that, and is that due to, siloed services and budgets? But one interesting question has come through for the panel on how important do they think it is changing public perception on the importance of owning your own data and using it to interact with diverse service providers?
It goes well. So any domestic homicide review that you read, where an individual has been killed, because after everyone, there is always a review, and all public services come together, and everybody, tears their shirts and beats their chests about what they could do better, and then they look at the review and put it on the shelf and go back to the day job. But none of those reviews ever say, well, she or he died because we shared too much. So yeah, I just this need to own, because that's the power. I think that for me is the cultural piece that needs to be broken from day one.
I think there's a really interesting sort of dichotomy here between kind of public expectation about what we are sharing and public trust in what they want us to share. It's an interesting thing. There's research that shows that public trust in the public sector sharing their data can be quite low. But actually, there's a huge expectation that we are sharing. I think so as part of the Office of Data Analytics work that we're starting in Sheffield, one of the early work streams we've talked about is actually a very proactive public trust piece of work to actually describe why this is really important, why it's beneficial. But I think there's a data literacy issue generally within the UK. I think most people don't understand data, don't understand how it's used, don't understand their rights and responsibilities. And I think there's something about how we make people more data savvy in general. And I think we've got a responsibility as public services to do that.
Well, and that's on us too, right, Mark? So one of my major frustrations in the first 4 weeks of lockdown was that central government was sending us data on Hackney residents who were who had registered online as clinically extremely vulnerable and therefore needed additional support. Central government, for whatever reason, chose not to provide structured address data. So we had no way of linking that person's record with any of our own. Thanks for that. Oh, and by the way, of course, there's no funding available for the additional staff time that was required to do that entirely manual process. So yeah, good one. So data literacy is a profound thing. I'd love if we could wind the clock back 15 years and have a profoundly different model of data ownership, where I own my data and I could share that frictionless with public and private bodies. I very much wish that to be true. I very much fear that that ship sailed quite some time ago. But I think the public debate around data sharing, it feels like so many others, very polarized. When we talk to our residents about their expectations of access and council services, residents are very clear that one of their main frustrations is when we aren't able to build on the conversation they had with us previously. But when we talk to residents who are actively thinking about how we use our data, they are very nervous about phoning for a housing repair, only for that person answering the call to know that that family is also known to children's social care. And I get that too. So that public debate is asking for two things which at the moment can't be reconciled. Yes, I expect my data to be seamlessly shared across the organisation because you're all one organisation. And no, I absolutely don't want my privacy to be affected because and accessing one council service should have no bearing on the other. And it's not that people hold those irreconcilable views, it's that within our population those two views exist, and at the moment the debate isn't in a form where we can help actually navigate what is and isn't acceptable.
It's a really good point.
Oh, sorry, Katie.
Well, I was going to say
final
that
comment from yourself. Sorry.
Nobody's having that conversation with the public at the moment, which is something that certainly my colleagues are really keen to do because of the public engagement piece we do have directly with them. But it was interesting, one of the comments here was around the cyber piece, you know. So criminals are definitely sharing our data on the dark web and utilising it quite successfully as well. The police are, you know, doing a certain amount of work in those areas. But I think going back to the education piece now, you know, we're teaching kids as young as 5 to code. Are we teaching them to be secure in the way we used to teach our kids not to talk to strangers? So if they're on the playground, don't talk to the stranger. Are we being as smart there with them as we should be in this area?
I think that's a very good point and a great point to end on. I think personally, I think this whole topic could have a whole discussion point on its own, really. Georgina, maybe that's something that we should take forward and actually have another panel around this particular subject, around the whole data piece, because I think there's lots of fantastic feedback and points of view that we should pick up on. Do we have time, Georgina, for one more question?
Yeah, I think we do. We can take one more. We've been getting some questions around cybersecurity, also some observations that cybersecurity has not been mentioned these last 2 days, and that's kind of, you know, positive. Does that mean the question is, have we learned any key lessons during COVID re cybersecurity for digital locals?
So, you know, the criminals have had a field day in lockdown. If I, for example, stalking as one example, where you've got 92% of all homicides that you know end in death have an element of stalking or cyber stalking in them. So we know that the end product here is terrible. Where we've got criminals who perhaps weren't as adept online, they certainly are now. And they can follow and they can pursue their victim in a way that pre-COVID they would have had to have spent time learning. So actually, in that point of view, COVID's been a really good time for the criminals to you know, hone their skills, if you like, online. Got the National Cyber Security Centre now, and I know government are very focused in this area because, you know, online fraud is our fastest growing crime trend, and we're losing literally billions. And we've just seen that the EncroChat that the National Crime Agency, Operation Benetic, that where they took down some really serious criminals using the dark web and their chat facilities on their mobile phones, has been really fascinating. So there's some very, very good work from a security point of view that the country is doing now in this area. But cybercrime is a big, you know, it's that digital beat and that physical beat that police officers have to walk. And whose responsibility is it to go after the criminal? If the criminal isn't in my county in Sussex, why should my policing bill pay to go after that criminal if they're living abroad somewhere? So, you know, whose responsibility does it become? So you're opening up a whole can of worms there. But
I mean, I think it links back to the I mean, I didn't mention it because it's kind of just something we are aware of, and we do. I mean, we've probably been more aware of it during COVID, because actually the way people have been using and accessing systems and data has been in a very different way. So we've had to be more aware of it, and we spent a lot of time actually giving people advice and guidance who are working from home or remotely about how to keep safe and how to keep data safe, and what to access and in what way to access it. So yeah, I think it fundamentally comes back to digital skills, and we all know that it's not really about technology; it's about people. Cybersecurity is about people understanding what to do, when to do it, and what not to do, and when not to do it. The examples that I've come across as Cyro, where things have happened, it's always been someone's done something stupid. It's not that there's been a massive breach at the firewall. It's been someone's done something really stupid. So how do we stop people doing that? And again, that's about digital skills and awareness.
Thank you. So I think that's nearly our time up. I just wanted to say thank you to all three of you, Matthew, Katie, and to Mark. I really enjoyed talking to you all immensely. I definitely think we have a couple of subjects that we could rerun this panel and go even deeper on, particularly around the data sharing piece. So thank you very much indeed.